Before we begin, if you're enjoying these stories from park rangers across America, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It helps us keep bringing you these accounts. Also, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Now, let's get into tonight's story. My name is Michael Torres, and I've been working as a park ranger at Quabbin Reservoir in central Massachusetts for about 2 years. If you're not from New England, you may not know about Quabbin. It's one of the largest man-made public water sources in the United States, covering an area of 39 square miles that used to be the Swift River Valley. It provides drinking water to dozens of communities in and around Boston. It's a place anyone would want to live. Peaceful, quiet, isolated. But there's a fact about Quabbin that many people don't know or are reluctant to talk about. Before the reservoir was built, before the valley was flooded, and before the dams were constructed, there were 4 towns here: Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott. Real towns with homes, churches, schools, and cemeteries. In 1938, the state decided Boston needed more water, so they evacuated everyone, demolished the buildings, moved the bodies from the cemeteries, and flooded the entire valley. 7,000 people displaced. 150 years of history erased. 4 towns that simply ceased to exist. I learned all this during my orientation, of course. It's part of the reservoir's history, part of what you tell visitors when they ask about the old stone walls you can sometimes see poking out of the water when the level drops. But it never really meant much to me beyond historical curiosity. Just something that happened a long time ago. That changed in October of 1998. It was a Tuesday morning, early. The kind of crisp fall day that makes you remember why you love New England. The leaves were at peak color, brilliant reds and oranges and yellows reflecting off the water's surface. I was doing a routine patrol along the western shore, checking for unauthorized access. Quabbin has strict rules about public access because it's a protected watershed. No swimming, no boating except in designated areas. Definitely no fishing in most spots. I parked my truck at one of the overlooks around 7 a.m., just as the sun was burning off the morning mist. The water was perfectly still, like glass. That's one of the things that struck me about Quabbin when I first started working here. On calm mornings, the reservoir becomes this massive mirror, reflecting the sky and the surrounding forest with such perfect clarity that it's hard to tell where the real world ends and the reflection begins. I got out and walked to the edge, breathing in the cold air, watching the mist curl and dissipate across the water. And that's when I noticed something strange. The reflection didn't match. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. The surface of the water showed the forest on the opposite shore, but the colors were wrong. In reality, the trees were brilliant autumn colors, the peak of fall foliage. But in the reflection, they looked darker, more muted, like they were showing late October or early November, after the leaves had started to turn brown. I rubbed my eyes and looked again. The real trees, bright orange and red. The reflected trees, dark and subdued. I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the opposite shore, then tilted them down to look at the reflection. Same thing. The real shore and its reflection showed 2 different seasons. That's weird, I muttered to myself. Maybe it was some trick of the light, some effect of the early morning sun hitting the water at a particular angle. I'd never seen it before, but I wasn't a physicist. Light does strange things. I made a note in my patrol log and continued my rounds. But throughout the day, I kept thinking about it. And every time I stopped near the water, I found myself checking the reflections. At the next overlook, around 9 a.m., I saw it again. The sky was mostly clear, just a few high clouds. But in the water's reflection, the cloud pattern was completely different. Not just shifted or distorted, but actually different clouds. Bigger, darker, more ominous. I looked up. Clear sky with light, wispy clouds. I looked down at the water. Storm clouds in the reflection. I took out my phone and snapped a few pictures. When I reviewed them, the camera had captured what I was seeing. In the photo, you could clearly see the discrepancy between sky and reflection. This wasn't my imagination. By noon, I was actively looking for it, and I started seeing more inconsistencies. A dead tree on the shore that appeared alive in the reflection. A section of rocky beach that showed as a small dock in the water's mirror image. Small things, mostly, but wrong. Consistently wrong. I called my supervisor, Richard Brennan, a career ranger who'd been at Quabbin for 15 years. "Rich, you got a minute? I'm seeing something strange out here." "Strange how?" His voice crackled through the radio. "The reflections on the water. They're not matching what's actually there. Different trees, different clouds, that sort of thing." There was a pause. "You feeling okay, Michael?" "Maybe you need to take a break, get some coffee. I'm serious." "I have photos. All right, bring them by the office when you're done with patrol." "But Michael, it's probably just atmospheric conditions. Happens sometimes with large bodies of water." "Yeah, probably," I agreed. But I didn't believe it. I finished my patrol route and headed back to the main office, a small building near the Windsor Dam. Rich was there with another ranger, Carol Yang, who'd been at Quabbin almost as long as Rich. I showed them the photos on my phone. Rich squinted at the screen, then shrugged. "Could be a lot of things. Angle of the sun, refraction, maybe your phone's camera glitching. I wouldn't worry about it too much." But Carol leaned in closer, studying the images. Her expression changed, became more serious. "Michael, where exactly did you take these?" "Western Shore near Prescott Peninsula." She and Rich exchanged a look. "What?" I asked. Carol handed my phone back. "Probably nothing. But that area, it's where the town of Prescott used to be. One of the drowned towns. Sometimes people report unusual things around there." "Unusual how?" "Lights under the water. Sounds that don't have a source. A couple of years ago, a fisherman claimed he saw buildings in the reflection that weren't there on shore. He said it looked like an old town." She paused. "He was drinking, though. Probably. Are you saying there's something paranormal about the reservoir?" I tried to keep the skepticism out of my voice. Rich laughed. "Carol's been here too long, Michael. She's gone native. There's nothing supernatural about Quabbin. It's a reservoir. Water, trees, fish, that's it." But Carol didn't smile. "You should read the history, Michael." About what happened in 1938. About how some people refused to leave, had to be forcibly removed. About how traumatic it was for the communities. Places hold on to trauma sometimes, especially places like this, where an entire way of life was deliberately destroyed. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded and headed home for the day. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the reflections. I'd grown up in Worcester, about 40 minutes from Quabbin, but I'd never paid much attention to the reservoir's history. It was just there, part of the landscape. But now, I was curious. I spent the evening researching the Swift River Valley and the 4 drowned towns. What I found was more tragic than I'd realized. In the 1920s, the Massachusetts legislature decided Boston's water supply needed to be expanded. They identified the Swift River Valley as the ideal location for a new reservoir. Never mind that 7,000 people lived there. Never mind the generations of families who'd built their lives in those towns. Progress demanded sacrifice. The evacuation began in 1927 and took over a decade. People were given compensation for their property, but many said it wasn't enough. could never be enough. You can't put a price on home, on community, on belonging. The demolition was systematic and brutal. Every building had to be destroyed or removed. Every grave had to be exhumed and relocated, over 2,000 bodies dug up and moved to new cemeteries. Families watched as their homes were torn down, their churches demolished, their schools burned. By 1938, the valley was empty. The dams were completed and the water began to rise. It took 7 years for the reservoir to fill completely. As the water rose, it covered everything. Roads, foundations, stone walls, entire landscapes disappeared beneath the surface. I found old photographs online. Pictures of Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott before the flooding. They looked like typical New England towns. White church steeples, main streets with shops, farmhouses with big porches. Normal places where normal people lived normal lives, until they didn't. I also found accounts from people who'd been displaced. One elderly woman interviewed in the 1980s said she still dreamed about her childhood home in Dana. Still walked through its rooms in her sleep. Still woke up disoriented, forgetting for a moment that her home was 40 feet underwater. Another man said he'd gone back in 1946 when the reservoir was full and stood on the shore looking at the water covering his hometown. He said it felt like standing at a grave. Everything he'd known was down there, drowned and forgotten. I went to bed that night with those stories in my head, and I dreamed about Quabbin. Dreamed I was standing on the shore, looking at the water, and in the reflection I could see the towns. Not ruins, but intact. Houses with smoke coming from chimneys, people walking down Main Street, children playing. And as I watched, one of the people in the reflection looked up at me. A woman, middle-aged, wearing a dress that looked like it was from the 1930s. She raised her hand and waved. I woke up at 3 a.m., heart pounding. Just a dream. Just my subconscious processing all the history I'd been reading. But the next morning, when I went back on patrol, I couldn't shake the unease. I decided to go back to Prescott Peninsula, the same area where I'd taken the photos the day before. This time, I brought a better camera, a real digital camera instead of my phone. The morning was overcast, the water gray and choppy. Not ideal conditions for seeing reflections, but I figured if the phenomenon was real, it wouldn't depend on perfect weather. I parked at the same overlook and walked down to the water's edge. The chop on the surface made it hard to see clear reflections, but as I watched, the wind died down and the water smoothed out, and there it was again. The reflection showed a different sky than the one above me. But this time, it wasn't just the clouds. This time I could see something else in the water's mirror. A structure, a building. I looked at the shoreline. Nothing but trees and rocks. I looked at the reflection. A white building with a steeple, a church. My hands shook as I raised the camera and started taking pictures. Through the lens, the church in the reflection was clear and detailed. White clapboard siding, tall windows, a simple steeple with a bell tower. It looked exactly like the old New England churches I'd seen in the historical photos. But it wasn't there. The actual shoreline was empty. I kept shooting, documenting everything. The church, the surrounding buildings that were starting to appear in the reflection as the water calmed further. What looked like a street, a row of houses, a general store with a faded sign. I was looking at a town that existed only in the water's reflection. And then I saw the people. At first I thought they were just shadows, tricks of light on the water. But as I stared, they became clearer. Figures moving along the reflected street. A woman hanging laundry. A man walking with a dog. Children playing near what looked like a schoolhouse. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, 1930s, maybe 1940s, and they moved with purpose, going about their daily lives, completely unaware that they existed only in a reflection. Or maybe we were the ones who only existed in a reflection. I lowered the camera, feeling dizzy. This wasn't possible. This wasn't real. But when I looked again, it was still there. A complete town, full of people, existing in the mirror of Quabbin's water. I heard a sound behind me and spun around. An elderly man was standing about 20 feet away, leaning on a walking stick. He was wearing a thick coat and a cap, and he was staring at the water with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You can see them, can't you?" he said. It wasn't really a question. "See what?" I tried to sound casual, professional, just a ranger doing his job. "The towns. Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, Prescott. You can see them in the water." I didn't answer right away. "Who are you?" "My name is Harold Pratt. I used to live in Dana. Born there in 1925, lived there until 1938 when they made us leave. I was 13 years old when I watched them tear down my house. I did the math. That would make him 73 years old. Mr. Pratt, what are you doing out here?" "Same thing I do every year. I come back to visit, see what's left." He gestured at the water. "Not much left up here. But down there, in the reflection, it's all still there, exactly as it was." "The reflection," I said carefully. "You've seen it too? The town in the water?" He nodded slowly. "Started seeing it about 10 years ago. At first, I thought I was going senile, but every time I come back, it's there. Dana, just as I remember it. My house on Elm Street. The church where I went to Sunday school. The library where I'd hide from my parents on summer afternoons. All still there if you know how to look. But it's just a reflection. It's not real." Harold looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Son, I'm 73 years old. I've lived in 5 different houses since they took my home. None of them ever felt right. None of them were where I belonged. But that town down there in the water, that's real to me. More real than anything I've lived for the past 60 years. Have you ever told anyone else about this? Reported it? Who would believe an old man talking about seeing ghost towns in the water? They'd lock me up, or at least take away my driver's license. No, I keep it to myself. Come out here a few times a year, look at my home, remember what was..." He paused. "But you're different. You can see it too, and you're not old and crazy. So maybe it's not just in my head after all." Before I could respond, Harold started walking away, moving slowly but steadily back toward the parking area. "Mr. Pratt, wait. I have questions." He didn't turn around. "Questions won't help you, son. Only thing that matters is what you choose to believe. The town in the water, is it real? Or is the world up here real? Maybe both. Maybe neither. You'll figure it out eventually, or it'll figure you out." He disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone by the water. I looked back at the reflection. The town was still there, still populated with people going about their lives. And as I watched, one of them, the woman I'd seen hanging laundry, looked up, looked directly at where I was standing. She couldn't see me, she was in a reflection, but somehow, it felt like her eyes met mine. She smiled, and then she waved, just like in my dream. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping my camera. When I looked again, the water had started to ripple, wind picking up, and the reflection was breaking apart. In seconds, all I could see was choppy gray water reflecting choppy gray sky. The town was gone. I spent the rest of my shift in a daze, mechanically completing my patrol route but not really seeing anything. My mind kept replaying what I'd witnessed. A town full of people, existing in a reflection. Harold Pratt, a displaced resident who'd been seeing the same thing for years. Was I losing my mind? Was there something in the water, some chemical that caused hallucinations? Or was this real? When I got back to the office, I asked Rich if he'd ever heard of a Harold Pratt. Pratt? Yeah, that name's familiar. I think there's a Pratt family that used to live in one of the drowned towns. Why? Just curious. I met an elderly man on patrol today who said he was from Dana. Rich raised an eyebrow. There are still a few old-timers around who grew up in the valley before the flooding. They're getting pretty rare, though. Most of them have passed. It's been 60 years. He said he comes back to visit, to look at what's left. Can't blame him, I guess. Must be hard, having your entire hometown erased like that. Rich went back to his paperwork. You settling in okay, Michael? No more weird reflections. No, I lied. Everything's fine. But everything was not fine. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the woman in the reflection, the way she'd looked at me, waved at me. The town with its white church and its main street and its people living lives that had supposedly ended 60 years ago. Around 2 a.m., I got out of bed and drove back to Quabbin. I knew it was crazy, knew I could get in trouble for being there in the middle of the night, but I had to see if it was still there. The reservoir was different at night, darker, more primal. The surrounding forest seemed to press in closer, and the water was invisible, just a void of darkness. I parked at the Prescott Overlook and made my way down to the shore with my flashlight. The water was calm, perfectly still. I shined my light on the surface, but all I could see was my own reflection and the beam of light bouncing back. I sat down on a rock and waited. Waited for what, I wasn't sure. Some sign, some proof that what I'd seen was real. An hour passed. 2 hours. Nothing. I was about to give up when I heard something. A sound coming from across the water. No, not from across the water. From the water. It sounded like voices. Distant, muffled, but definitely voices. Multiple people talking, laughing, living. I stood up, straining to hear. The sounds grew clearer, a dog barking, a child calling out. The ring of a bell, like a church bell announcing the hour. And then I saw the lights. Under the water, faint but unmistakable, there were lights. Not natural lights. Not bioluminescence or reflected stars. These were artificial lights. House lights. Street lights. The lights of a town. The lights were moving, changing, as if people were walking past windows turning lamps on and off, living their nighttime routines 40 feet below the surface. I watched, transfixed, as the underwater town came to life in the darkness. The lights spread out in a pattern that suggested streets, blocks, a planned community. And above the water, still perfectly calm, I could see the reflection again. But this time it was reversed. The lights were below the water, and their reflection was on the surface. The surface of Quabbin had become a mirror showing what lay beneath. And in that mirror, in that reflection of the drowned town, people were looking up. Looking up at me, at the surface world, at the place where their towns had once stood. One figure in particular seemed to stand directly below where I was sitting. A woman in a dress. The same woman I'd seen hanging laundry in the reflection that morning. She raised her hand slowly and pressed it against the surface of the water from below. From my perspective, it looked like she was pressing against the underside of a mirror. And then she spoke. I couldn't hear the words clearly, but I could read her lips. "Come home, Michael. Come home." How did she know my name? I scrambled backward, away from the water's edge, my flashlight dropping from my hand and rolling toward the reservoir. It splashed into the shallow water, and the moment it broke the surface, everything changed. The lights went out. The reflection disappeared. The sound stopped. I was alone in the dark, staring at black water, my heart hammering in my chest. I grabbed my flashlight from the shallows and ran back to my truck, not caring about protocol or professionalism. I just needed to get away from that place, from that water, from those impossible lights and that woman who knew my name. As I drove home, hands shaking on the wheel, I kept seeing her face in my mind. The woman in the drowned town, pressing her hand against the water, calling me home. But I'd never lived in Dana or any of the other drowned towns. I'd grown up in Worcester. My family had no connection to the Swift River Valley, so why did she think I should come home? And why, deep in some part of my mind I didn't want to acknowledge, did it feel like she might be right? I called in sick the next day. It was the first time I'd missed work since starting at Quabbin, but I couldn't face that water. Not yet. Not until I understood what was happening. I spent the morning at the Worcester Public Library, going through their local history collection. They had an entire section dedicated to the Swift River Valley and the creation of Quabbin Reservoir. Books, photographs, maps, personal accounts from displaced residents. I started reading and couldn't stop. The more I learned, the more heartbreaking the story became. The evacuation wasn't just a relocation. It was a forced erasure of identity. People who'd lived in the valley for generations, whose families had been there since the 1700s, were told their towns were being sacrificed for the greater good. For Boston's water supply. Some residents fought it. They formed committees, hired lawyers, appealed to the state legislature. But in the end, the government had made its decision. Eminent domain. The law was on the side of the reservoir. I found a book of photographs published in 1935, just before the demolition began. The images showed ordinary life in extraordinary detail. A man standing in front of his general store in Enfield. Children playing in a schoolyard in Dana. A wedding photo taken on the steps of the Greenwich Church. A farmer with his dairy cows in Prescott. One photograph stopped me cold. It was labeled Main Street, Dana, 1936. It showed exactly what I'd seen in the water's reflection. The white church, the row of houses, the general store. Same buildings, same layout, preserved perfectly in that impossible mirror. I turned to the next page and found individual portraits. Residents of Dana who'd agreed to be photographed before the town disappeared. There were dozens of faces, each with a name and age. And there, in the middle of the page, was the woman I'd seen. The caption read, Eleanor Torres, age 34, Dana, Massachusetts, 1937. Torres, my last name. I stared at the photograph. It was definitely her. Same face, same eyes, same gentle smile. The woman who'd waved at me from the reflection. The woman who'd called me home. But that was impossible. Eleanor Torres, if she'd been 34 in 1937, would be 95 now. And the woman in the reflection hadn't looked elderly. She'd looked exactly as she did in this photograph. Frozen in time. I kept reading. According to the caption, Eleanor Torres had been a schoolteacher in Dana. She'd never married. When the evacuation orders came, she'd been one of the last holdouts, refusing to leave her home. Eventually, she'd been forcibly relocated to Worcester, where she'd lived until her death in 1954. My family was from Worcester. My parents, my grandparents. We'd been there for generations. Or had we? A terrible suspicion was forming in my mind. I pulled out my phone and called my mother. Michael, are you okay? You never call in the middle of the day. Mom, I have a question about family history. What do you know about the Torres family before we lived in Worcester? Before Worcester? I think we've always been in Worcester, haven't we? Your father's family has been there since the early 1900s. Are you sure? Was there anyone in the family from the Swift River Valley? From Dana or Enfield or any of those towns? There was a pause. Why are you asking about that? Just curious. Work stuff. I'm researching the history of Quabbin. Well, my mother's voice became uncertain. You know, I remember your abuela mentioning something once. Your father's grandmother, Carmen. She said something about the family losing their first home before she was born. Something about it being taken for the reservoir. But I always thought she was confused. Old age, you know. My grandmother, Carmen, had died when I was 10. I barely remembered her. But now, I was desperately trying to recall anything she'd said about the family history. Do we have any old family records? Birth certificates, that kind of thing? Sure, there's a box of stuff in the attic. Old documents, photos. Why? Can you look for anything about where the family lived before Worcester? Anything at all? Michael, what's this about? Please, Mom. It's important. She sighed. All right, I'll look tonight after work. But you're worrying me. Are you sure you're okay? I'm fine. Just trying to understand some things. After we hung up, I sat in the library for a long time, staring at Eleanor Torres's photograph. Could she have been a relative? An aunt? A great-aunt? It was possible. Torres wasn't an uncommon name, but the coincidence felt too strong to ignore. I spent the rest of the afternoon reading more accounts from displaced residents. Many of them described a sense of loss that never faded. One woman said she felt like a part of her had drowned with the valley. A man described returning to Quabbin years later and feeling like he was visiting his own grave. But what struck me most were the stories about people who refused to believe the towns were really gone. Residents who claimed they could still hear church bells ringing on Sunday mornings. Families who swore they could smell bread baking from the town bakery on certain days. People who said they sometimes saw lights under the water at night. I'd dismissed those stories as grief, imagination, wishful thinking. But now I'd seen it myself. The lights, the town, the people living their lives in the reflection. What if they weren't hallucinations? What if the towns had never really been destroyed? What if flooding the valley had somehow created a split? A mirror reality where the towns continued to exist. I was getting into territory that made no rational sense, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. That evening, my mother called back. Her voice was shaky. Michael, I found something in the attic. An old birth certificate. Your father's grandfather, Miguel Torres, born in 1970. Birthplace, Dana, Massachusetts. My father's grandfather, which would make Eleanor Torres, the schoolteacher, my great-great-aunt or something similar. Mom, Dana was flooded in 1938. The town didn't exist in 1970. I know. That's what's so strange. The certificate must be wrong. Maybe it's a fake, or maybe someone made a mistake when it was issued. But Michael, there's something else. I found a photo. It's old, from the 1930s. There's a woman in it, and written on the back is Aunt Eleanor Dana, 1936. Can you send me a picture of it? Sending now. A moment later, my phone buzzed. I opened the image and my hand started shaking. It was her, Eleanor Torres, standing in front of the same white church I'd seen in the reflection. And there, on the back of the photo in faded ink, Aunt Eleanor, Dana, 1936. She was family. Eleanor Torres was my great-great-aunt, and she'd lived in Dana before it was drowned. Michael, what's going on? My mother's voice was worried now. I need to go, Mom. Thank you for finding this. Michael, I hung up and immediately called the library's reference desk. Do you have old census records? Specifically for Dana, Massachusetts, 1930s. We have some digitized records on microfilm. Would you like to make an appointment? I'm here now. Can I access them? 20 minutes later, I was scrolling through census data from 1930, looking for the Torres family in Dana. And there they were. Carlos Torres, age 45. Occupation: farmer Maria. Torres, age 43. Occupation: homemaker Eleanor Torres, age 27. Occupation: teacher Miguel Torres, age 15. Occupation: student Miguel. My great-grandfather's name. He would have been 15 in 1930, 23 when the town was evacuated in 1938. But according to my family records, he'd been born in 1970, 32 years after Dana ceased to exist. Unless, I thought about the reflection, about the town still existing in the water's mirror, about the people living their lives as if 1938 had never happened. What if, in that reflection, Miguel Torres had grown up normally, gone to school, become an adult, had children? What if the Miguel Torres who'd been born in 1970 in the birth certificate was the son of the Miguel Torres from the 1930 census? What if my family had never left Dana at all? What if we'd stayed there, in the drowned town, in the reflection, living our lives generation after generation while the surface world moved on? And what if I was supposed to be there too? The thought was insane, but it explained so much. Eleanor calling me home, the feeling of wrongness I'd always had, like I didn't quite fit in the surface world. The strange dreams I'd had about water and drowning since childhood. I'd always thought I was from Worcester, but what if I was really from Dana, and somehow, impossibly, I'd ended up on the wrong side of the water? I left the library in a daze and drove back to Quabbin. I had to see it again, had to confirm that what I'd seen was real and not some elaborate hallucination. It was late afternoon when I arrived, the sun starting to dip toward the horizon. I went to the same overlook, the same stretch of water where I'd first seen the reflection. The surface was calm, and there it was, the town, clear as day in the reflection. More vivid than before, more detailed. I could see individual people now, walking along Main Street, entering and leaving shops. Children playing in a schoolyard. A horse-drawn cart delivering goods. It was a normal day in Dana, Massachusetts. In 1938, or 1939, or whenever that town existed in its frozen pocket of time. And there, in front of the general store, was Eleanor Torres. She was talking to another woman, gesturing animatedly, laughing. She looked happy, she looked home. I knelt at the water's edge, studying the reflection. Could I reach them? Could I somehow cross from this reality into theirs? I reached out and touched the water's surface. The moment my finger broke through, I felt it. A pull, like a gentle current trying to draw me down. Not physically, but something else. My consciousness, my sense of self, being tugged toward the reflection. I jerked my hand back, but the sensation lingered. The pull was still there, constant and insistent. Come home, it seemed to say. Come where you belong. You feel it too, don't you? I turned to find Harold Pratt standing behind me again, leaning on his walking stick. Mr. Pratt, I didn't hear you approach. You were too focused on the water. On them. He nodded toward the reflection. You've figured it out, haven't you? About your family. How do you know about my family? I knew your great-grandfather, Miguel Torres. We went to school together in Dana. He was a good kid. Funny. Smart. We used to fish together in the Swift River before. He trailed off, looking at the water, before they took it all away. But Miguel was evacuated. He moved to Worcester. Did he? Harold's eyes were knowing. Or did that world's Miguel move to Worcester? Maybe this world's Miguel never left. Maybe he's down there right now, living his life, having children and grandchildren. Maybe you're one of them. That's insane. I can't have two family lines. I can't exist in both places. Can't you? Look at the water, Michael. Really look. What do you see? I looked, and for the first time, I focused not on the buildings or the people, but on one person in particular. There was a young man in the reflection, maybe mid-20s, walking down Main Street. He was wearing clothes from the 1930s, but his face, it was my face. Not similar, not a relative. My exact face. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible." "You're split," Harold said quietly. "Part of you here, part of you there. It happens sometimes when the reflection is strong. People who should have been in Dana, who were meant to be in Dana, but ended up on the surface instead. The reflection pulls at them, trying to make them whole. I'm not split. I'm me. I'm Michael Torres from Worcester. Are you? Or are you Michael Torres from Dana, pretending to be from Worcester because that's what the surface world needs you to believe?" I stood up, backing away from the water. "This isn't real." "None of this is real. Then why can you see it? Why does Eleanor know your name? Why do you feel like you're being called home to a place you've never been?" Harold moved closer. "I'll tell you why. Because it is home. Because part of you never left. And now the reflection is trying to pull you back, make you whole again. What happens if I go? If I somehow cross over to the reflection? You become complete. You stop being split between two worlds. You join your family in Dana, where you were always meant to be." He paused. "But you can never come back. The surface world will forget you ever existed. You'll just be another disappeared ranger, another mystery. And if I don't go, then you live the rest of your life feeling incomplete, always knowing there's somewhere you belong but can't reach. The pull will get stronger, Michael. Eventually, you'll either give in or it'll drive you mad." "How do you know all this?" Harold smiled sadly. "Because I've been feeling the pull for 60 years. Every time I come here, the reflection gets clearer. My house in Dana looks more real than the apartment where I sleep. My mother and father, who died decades ago, are there in the reflection, alive and waiting, and every time I leave, it gets harder. One of these days, I'm not going to leave. I'm going to let the water take me home. But you'll drown. Will I? Or will I finally breathe for the first time in 60 years? He turned and walked away, leaving me alone with the reflection. I stayed there until dark, watching the town in the water, watching the young man with my face go about his life, watching Eleanor Torres close up the school and walk home to a house that had been demolished 80 years ago. And I felt the pull, constant, insistent, growing stronger with each passing moment. Come home. Come where you belong. Come, be whole. I drove back to my apartment in Worcester, but it felt wrong. Foreign. Like I was sleeping in someone else's bed, living someone else's life. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Dana. Saw the town in vivid detail. Saw my family there, living and laughing and waiting. Around 3 a.m., I got up and opened my laptop. I needed to know more about the mechanics of the flooding. How deep was the water? What remained underneath? Were there really foundations, roads, structures still down there? The answer was yes. Quabbin wasn't that deep in most places, 40 to 60 feet, and the towns had been demolished but not removed. The foundations were still there, the cellar holes, the stone walls. When the water level dropped during droughts, you could sometimes see them. I found a forum where divers discussed Quabbin. Diving was strictly prohibited, but some people did it anyway, illegally. They described what they'd seen. Foundations arranged in perfect grids, showing where streets had been. Stone walls marking property lines. Cellar holes with stairs leading down into darkness. One diver claimed he'd seen an intact church foundation, the outline of where the walls had stood, even the steps leading up to where the door would have been. But that's all they were. Foundations, ruins, not living towns with people walking the streets, except in the reflection. The next morning, I called Rich and told him I needed to take a few personal days. He was concerned, but agreed. I think he could hear the stress in my voice. I spent those days researching everything I could about reflections, mirrors, parallel realities. I went down internet rabbit holes about quantum physics and multiple universes. I looked up psychological conditions that caused hallucinations. But nothing I found explained what I was seeing. Nothing accounted for the historical accuracy, the family connections, the pull I felt toward the water. On the fourth day, I drove back to Quabbin. I had to confront this, had to understand it. This time, I went at dawn, when the light would be perfect for seeing reflections. I brought my camera, my notepad, everything I needed to document what I saw. The water was glass smooth, and the reflection was waiting. Dana spread out before me in perfect detail. I could see everything now. Not just the main street, but the entire town. Houses with gardens, barns with animals, a school with children arriving for the day, a complete, living community. And Eleanor Torres was there, standing in front of her house, looking up at the surface. Looking at me. She spoke, and this time I could hear her. Not with my ears, but in my mind. "Michael, it's time. You've learned the truth. Now you have to choose. Stay where you don't belong, or come home where you do." "I don't belong there," I said out loud, even though I knew she couldn't hear me the normal way. "I wasn't born in Dana. I'm from Worcester. You were born in both places, in two versions of the world. One where Dana was destroyed, one where it survived. You've been living in the destroyed version, but your true self is here waiting. Look." The young man with my face appeared next to her. He looked up at the surface, at me, and he waved. He was me. Not a relative, not a coincidence. He was me, living the life I should have lived if my family had never been displaced. "Join us," Eleanor said. "Make yourself whole. All you have to do is step into the water. Let yourself sink. And when you reach the bottom, you'll find you're not drowning. You're finally breathing. You're finally home." I stood at the edge, feeling the pull stronger than ever. It would be so easy. Just step forward. Let the water take me. Find out if Harold was right. If I would drown, or if I would wake up in Dana, complete and whole. But something held me back. Fear, maybe. Or the rational part of my brain screaming that this was insane. That I'd drown in 40 feet of water and become just another tragedy. "I need more time," I said. "I need to understand." Eleanor's expression was sad but patient. "Time moves differently here, Michael. We'll wait, but know that the longer you resist, the more the split hurts you. You can't live in two worlds forever. Eventually, you'll have to choose. Surface or depth. Worcester or Dana. The world that is, or the world that should have been." The reflection began to fade as the sun rose higher, the angle of light changing. Within minutes, Dana was gone, replaced by ordinary reflections of trees and sky. I walked back to my truck on shaking legs. I had a choice to make. But how do you choose between the life you've lived and the life you were meant to live? How do you choose between reality and reflection when you're no longer sure which is which? I went back to work. What else could I do? I needed the routine, needed something normal to hold on to while my understanding of reality crumbled around me. But every patrol route took me past water, and every reflection made me wonder what I was really seeing. Rich noticed the change in me. On my first day back, he pulled me aside. "Michael, you don't look good. Maybe you should take more time off or see someone, a therapist maybe." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just some family stuff I'm working through." "Family stuff at Quabbin?" He gave me a pointed look. "Carol told me you've been spending a lot of time near Prescott Peninsula, near where the drowned towns used to be." "I'm just interested in the history." "History's fine." "Obsession isn't. I've seen it before, Michael. Rangers who get too caught up in the tragedy of what happened here. They start seeing things, feeling things. They forget that Quabbin is what it is now, not what it was. The past is dead and buried, underwater in this case. But that was exactly the problem. The past wasn't buried. It was alive in the reflection, waiting. Over the next few weeks, I tried to stay away from the water's edge. I focused on maintenance work, visitor education, anything that kept me away from clear views of the reservoir. But the pull never stopped. It was always there, a constant pressure in the back of my mind. Come home. Other rangers started commenting on my behavior. Carol asked if I was sleeping okay. Tom, one of the newer rangers, joked that I looked like I'd seen a ghost. If only he knew how close to the truth that was. Then, in early November, something happened that changed everything. Another ranger disappeared. Her name was Jennifer Marks, 32 years old, 5 years with the Park Service. She'd been doing an evening patrol near the Prescott Peninsula and never returned. Her truck was found at one of the overlooks, driver's door open, keys still in the ignition. Her radio, her phone, her equipment were all in the vehicle. But Jennifer was gone. The search started immediately. State police, K-9 units, volunteers. They combed the forest and shoreline for days. Helicopters flew overhead with thermal imaging. Divers went into the water searching the shallows. They found nothing. I was part of the search team, and with every hour that passed, I felt a growing certainty about what had happened to Jennifer. She'd been experiencing the same thing I had, the reflections, the pull, and she'd made a choice. She'd gone into the water. On the 5th day of the search, I went back to the Prescott Overlook alone, after the official search had ended for the day. It was late afternoon, the light perfect for seeing reflections. And there she was, Jennifer Marks, walking down Main Street in Dana, Massachusetts. She was wearing different clothes, period-appropriate clothes from the 1930s. She looked healthy, happy, and completely at home. As I watched, she stopped and looked up at the surface, looked right at me, and she smiled. She mouthed 3 words, "I'm home now." Then she turned and walked away, disappearing into one of the houses on the reflected street. I staggered back from the water's edge, my heart pounding. She'd done it. She'd crossed over somehow. She was living in the drowned town now, in the reflection, in whatever pocket of reality or time or consciousness existed there. And she looked happy. Over the next few days, the official story became clear. Jennifer Marks had likely fallen into the reservoir and drowned. The water was cold. The shores were rocky. Perhaps she'd slipped, hit her head. Perhaps she'd gotten disoriented in the twilight. The recovery teams would continue searching, but privately, everyone accepted that her body might never be found. Quabbin was deep and vast. It kept its secrets. Only I knew the truth. Jennifer hadn't drowned. She'd gone home. But if she could cross over, how had she done it? I'd touched the water multiple times and felt the pull, but I'd never actually transitioned. There had to be something more, some technique or state of mind required. I started researching disappearances at Quabbin. There weren't many, the reservoir was well patrolled and access was restricted. But over the years, a few people had vanished. A fisherman in 1972, a hiker in 1985, a photographer in 1991, all near the drowned towns, all without any body ever recovered. Had they all crossed over? Had they all found their way into the reflection? I needed to talk to Harold Pratt again. He'd been resisting the pull for 60 years. He might know something. I found his address in the phone book. Worcester, a small apartment in an old building downtown. When I knocked on his door, he answered slowly, looking even more frail than before. "Michael Torres," he said with a knowing look. "I wondered when you'd come find me. Come in." His apartment was sparse but neat. The walls were covered with old photographs of Dana. The main street, the church, the school, his family's farm, and on every surface, more photos, all showing the town before it was destroyed. "You're surrounded by ghosts," I said. "Better than being surrounded by strangers." He gestured for me to sit. "You've been to the water again." Seen the reflection growing stronger. Another ranger crossed over, Jennifer Marks. I saw her in the reflection. She's living there now in Dana. Harold nodded slowly. "It's happening more often. The reservoir's been here for 60 years. That's enough time for the reflection to stabilize, to become more real. More people can see it now. More people feel the call. How do you cross over? What's the secret? There's no secret. You just have to want it badly enough. Want it more than you want to stay here. When your desire to go home outweighs your attachment to this world, the water stops being water. It becomes a doorway. And you've never crossed because you're not ready to let go of this world." He smiled sadly. "I'm not ready to admit that this world isn't my home. If I cross over, it means accepting that I never belonged here. That 60 years in Worcester, in this apartment, in this life, were all a mistake. That's a hard thing to accept. Eleanor Torres is my great-great-aunt. I've confirmed it. My family is from Dana. Then you know where you belong. But I've lived my whole life in Worcester. My memories, my friends, my job, that's all real, isn't it?" Harold looked at me with those old, tired eyes. "Is it? Or are those memories just what the surface world gave you to fill the space where your Dana memories should have been? The reflection isn't creating a new reality, Michael. It's showing you the reality that was taken from you, your true life, the one you should have lived." I don't remember Dana. I don't remember living there. Because you weren't allowed to remember. When the towns were destroyed, they didn't just flood the valley. They flooded memory, identity, belonging. They tried to erase the fact that these places ever existed. But you can't erase reality that cleanly. The erasure created a wound in the world, and the reflection is that wound trying to heal. I stood up and walked to his window looking out at Worcester's streets. If I cross over, what happens to this version of me? The one who's lived here all these years? He stops existing. Or rather, he's revealed to have never really existed. You were always from Dana. Everything else was just a story told to fill the absence. That sounds like dying. Dying is when you're where you belong and you leave. This is different. This is going from where you don't belong to where you do. It's the opposite of dying. It's like being born for the first time. I turned to face him. "Why haven't you crossed, Harold?" "Really?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he pointed to a photo on the wall. A young woman in 1930s dress smiling at the camera. Her name was Ruth. We were going to get married, but when the evacuation happened, her family moved to Springfield. Mine moved to Worcester. We tried to keep it together, but the distance, the upheaval, we lost touch. She married someone else. Had children, grandchildren. She died in 1994. You stayed here because of her. I stayed here because part of my life was here, real and true. My love for Ruth happened in this world, not in the reflection. If I cross over, there's a version of me in Dana who never met her, never loved her, and I'm not willing to erase that. Even if it means staying split, staying incomplete. So, the reflection doesn't give you everything. It gives you what you would have had if the towns were never destroyed, but you lose what you gained because they were exactly. It's not about which reality is more real. It's about which one you choose to believe in, which one you choose to complete. I left Harold's apartment with more questions than answers. He was right about one thing. Crossing over meant accepting that my entire life in Worcester was a mistake, a substitute for a life I should have lived. Could I do that? Could I erase Michael Torres of Worcester to become Michael Torres of Dana? The next few days were a blur. I went through the motions of work, but my mind was elsewhere. I found myself driving to Quabbin during my off hours, sitting by the water, watching the reflection. The town was always there now. I didn't need perfect conditions or specific times of day. Dana existed in the water, constant and real, waiting for me. And the other Michael, the one in the reflection, was becoming more aware of me. Sometimes he'd stop what he was doing and look up at the surface. We'd lock eyes, surface Michael and reflection Michael, and I'd feel the pull intensify, the two halves wanting to merge, to become whole. Eleanor was always there too, watching, waiting. She never pushed, never demanded, just maintained her patient vigil, knowing I'd make my choice eventually. One night in mid-November I couldn't sleep. The pull was stronger than ever, a physical ache in my chest. I got in my truck and drove to Quabbin, arriving around 2 a.m. The water was perfectly still, reflecting a sky full of stars. And beneath those stars, Dana glowed with warm light. Houses with candles in the windows, street lamps casting golden pools, a town alive and welcoming in the middle of the night. I walked down to the water's edge and knelt, looking at my reflection. But it wasn't just my reflection. It was both of us. Surface Michael and Dana Michael superimposed. Two versions of the same person, existing in the same space, but in different worlds. I don't know how to choose, I said out loud, even though no one could hear me. But someone did hear. Eleanor appeared in the reflection, kneeling across from me as if we were on opposite sides of a window. "Then don't choose," she said, her voice clear in my mind. "Just let yourself fall. Trust that the water will catch you. Trust that home is waiting. What if I drown? What if this is all hallucination and I just drown? Then you drown. But Michael, are you really living now? Split between two worlds, belonging to neither. At least drowning would be a choice. At least you'd know you tried to find where you belong." I reached out and touched the water. The surface was cold, but beneath the cold was warmth. The warmth of home, of family, of belonging. I could just lean forward, let myself fall in, sink down through the cold water, and if Eleanor and Harold were right, I'd pass through some barrier and find myself in Dana, whole and complete. Or I'd drown in 40 feet of cold water and become another tragic mystery. I pulled my hand back. I wasn't ready. Not yet. Eleanor's expression was sad, but understanding. "When you're ready, we'll be here. We'll always be here." The reflection faded as clouds covered the stars. I was alone in the dark, kneeling by water that was just water again. I drove home and finally slept, exhausted by the emotional toll of the decision. And I dreamed. In the dream, I was underwater, sinking slowly through green-tinted water. But I wasn't drowning. I was breathing normally, the water somehow becoming air in my lungs. Below me, I could see the ruins of Dana. Not the living town from the reflection, but the real, drowned ruins. Foundations, cellar holes, stone walls, and standing among the ruins were people, dozens of them, hundreds, all the residents of Dana, Enfield, Greenwich, and Prescott who'd been displaced in 1938. They were standing in the underwater ruins of their homes, looking up at me as I descended. They weren't ghosts. They weren't dead. They were just waiting for the water to give back what it had taken, waiting for someone to remember that they were more than just names in history books. Eleanor was there, standing in front of what had been her house. And next to her was the other Michael, my reflection self, waiting to merge with me and become complete. "This is the choice," Eleanor said in the dream. "Not between life and death, but between two different kinds of life. Surface life, where you're split and incomplete. Or depth life, where you're whole, but in a different kind of reality. Neither one is wrong, but you can't live both." I woke up as dawn was breaking, and I knew what I had to do. Not what I would choose, not yet, but what I had to do first. I had to go deeper. I had to see what was really down there beneath the surface, not the reflection, not the ruins, the truth. And there was only one way to do that. I had to go into the water. I knew diving in Quabbin was illegal. The water was a protected watershed, and any contamination risked the drinking supply for millions of people. Rangers who caught illegal divers faced serious penalties, and the divers themselves could be fined or arrested. But I was a ranger. I knew the patrol schedules, the blind spots, the places where someone could access the water without being seen. And I needed to know what was really down there. I bought diving gear with cash at a shop in Springfield, telling the clerk I was planning a trip to the Caribbean. Wetsuit, tank, regulator, mask, fins, everything I needed. On a cold morning in late November, I called in sick again. Then I drove to a remote access point on the eastern shore, a place where the old town of Prescott had stood. I parked my truck out of sight and suited up, hands shaking from cold and fear and anticipation. The water was 43 degrees. Even with the wetsuit, the cold was shocking when I waded in. But I kept going, pushing through the shallow water until I was deep enough to dive. I took a breath from the regulator, said a silent prayer, and went under. The water was murky at first, full of particles and sediment, but as I descended, it cleared. The bottom was about 45 feet down here, and as I approached it, I began to see the ruins. Stone walls marking property lines, a cellar hole with stone steps leading down into deeper darkness, the remains of a road, the pavement broken but still visible. This had been a town. People had lived here, walked these roads, built these walls. I swam along the old road, following it deeper into the drowned town. Foundation after foundation appeared out of the murk. Some were just outlines, others still had partial walls standing. I saw what might have been a church, a larger foundation with a rectangular shape, and everywhere that sense of presence, not seeing anything supernatural, not yet. Just feeling like I wasn't alone down here, like the water was watching me. I checked my air, about half a tank left. I should surface, head back. This was already reckless enough. But something pulled me forward, a sense that I was close to understanding. I swam toward what looked like a larger structure. As I got closer, I realized it was a school. The foundation was more intact than the others, and I could still see the separate rooms, the layout of classrooms. Eleanor had been a teacher. This might have been her school. I floated above it, looking down, and that's when I saw her. Not a reflection, not a vision. She was there, underwater, standing in what had been her classroom. But she wasn't drowning, wasn't floating. She was standing as if on solid ground, looking up at me. She smiled and beckoned. I should have been terrified. I should have bolted back to the surface. But instead, I felt a strange calm. This was what I'd come to see. The truth beneath the surface. I swam down toward her. As I got closer, the water around her seemed different. Less murky, clearer, like a bubble of different reality. She stepped aside and gestured to the doorway of the classroom. An invitation. I hesitated at the threshold. If I went through, would I be able to come back? But I'd come this far. I had to know. I swam through the doorway. And everything changed. The water was gone. I was standing in a classroom, perfectly dry, perfectly normal. 1930s decor, a chalkboard covered in lessons, desks arranged in neat rows. Sunlight streamed through windows that shouldn't exist 45 feet underwater. I pulled off my diving mask and regulator. The air was breathable, fresh, smelling of chalk and old wood. "Welcome to Dana," Eleanor said. She was standing next to me, solid and real. "You found your way through. How is this possible?" The reflection isn't just a mirror. It's a door. When the valley was flooded, some of us couldn't leave, couldn't accept that our homes were being destroyed. Our refusal to leave created this place, a pocket of reality where Dana still exists. Not underwater, not drowned, just sideways, parallel to your world. I walked to a window and looked out. I saw Main Street, the white church, houses with gardens, people walking, talking, living. Normal life in a town that shouldn't exist. Is this real? Or am I hallucinating from nitrogen narcosis? It's as real as you choose to believe it is. Reality isn't absolute, Michael. It's consensus. Your world agreed that Dana was destroyed. We disagreed. Both realities are true. And the Michael I keep seeing in the reflection? The one who looks like me? Eleanor smiled. You're not split, Michael. That's not how it works. You were born in your world's Worcester, but your soul remembers Dana. Some part of you knows you should have been born here. That's what creates the pull. Your consciousness trying to align with where it belongs. So, if I stay here, what happens to Worcester Michael? Nothing. He continues existing, because he's the real you, but he stops feeling split. The pull disappears. He accepts that Worcester is home, and he lives a full, complete life there. She paused. But there's another option. You can choose to exist here instead. Release Worcester, accept Dana, and live the life you would have lived if the flooding had never happened. What does that mean practically? She walked to a desk and picked up a photograph. It showed the classroom full of students, and Eleanor at the front. Standing in the back of the room, helping a student, was a young man who looked exactly like me. That's you if you choose Dana. A teacher like me, never left the valley, married a local girl, had children. Simple life, happy life. Everything you would have been if your family had stayed. But I'm a park ranger. I went to college for environmental science. I have a life. You have a life that was given to you as substitute for the one that was taken. Both are real, Michael. But only one will ever feel like home. I looked out the window again, at the peaceful town going about its day. It was idyllic, perfect, everything you'd want in a small community. But it was also frozen in time, trapped in 1938, forever repeating the same cycles. Do people age here? Do they die? Time works differently. We experience it, but we're not bound by it the same way. People can choose to age, choose to stay as they are. Most of us maintain ourselves as we were in our prime, before the evacuation. Why would we want to grow old when we can be young forever? That sounds like being dead. Or like being finally, truly alive, freed from time's tyranny, able to exist in the eternal now. I turned to face her. And what about the real world? What about the fact that millions of people depend on Quabbin for water? If I stay here, if more people cross over, does that affect anything? The reservoir and Dana exist simultaneously. Both are real. You drinking water from Quabbin doesn't affect us. We exist in parallel, not in conflict. Show me more. Show me what my life would be if I chose this. Eleanor led me out of the school and into the town. We walked down Main Street and people nodded at me, greeted me by name. "Morning, Michael." "Nice day, isn't it, Michael?" They all knew me, because in this reality, I'd always been here. Eleanor brought me to a small house on Elm Street. "This would be yours. You and your wife Sarah bought it 2 years ago. You're fixing it up, planning to start a family soon." "Sarah? Who's Sarah?" "You'll meet her if you stay. She's perfect for you. Kind, smart, loves the valley as much as you do. Everything you'd want in a partner." But I didn't know Sarah. I'd never met her. She was part of a life I hadn't lived. "Can I meet my family?" "The Torres family." "Of course. They're expecting you for Sunday dinner." She led me to a farmhouse on the edge of town, and there they were. My great-grandfather Miguel, young and healthy. My great-great-grandparents Carlos and Maria, all of them alive. All of them welcoming me into their home like I'd been there all along. "Mijo," Maria hugged me tightly. "You're late." We were worried. I'm sorry. I got held up. We sat down to dinner, and they talked about local events, town politics, whose crops were doing well. Normal conversation, normal family. Except this was a family that had died decades ago in my world. Miguel noticed my confusion. "You okay, Primo? You seem distant, just thinking about things." "Well, stop thinking so much. Eat. Your Aunt Eleanor made your favorite." After dinner, Eleanor walked me back to town. The sun was setting, painting the sky in beautiful colors. "You could be happy here," she said. "No more feeling split, no more wondering where you belong. Just home, finally. But it's not my home. I didn't grow up here. These aren't my memories. Not yet. But if you stay, they will be. The moment you commit to Dana, your consciousness shifts. You'll remember growing up here, going to school here, building a life here. Worcester will fade like a dream, and you'll wonder why you ever doubted this was real." That terrified me more than anything else. The idea that I could forget my entire life, have it overwritten by a false history. Or was it a false history? Was the Dana version of Michael more real than the Worcester version? "I need to think," I said. "Can I go back? To the surface? Or am I trapped here now?" "You can always leave. The door works both ways. But every time you leave and return, it gets easier to stay. Eventually, you won't want to leave at all." She led me back to the school, back to the classroom where I'd entered. Through the doorway, I could see water again, murky and cold. "When you're ready, come home," Eleanor said. "Your family is waiting. Your life is waiting." I put my diving gear back on and swam through the doorway. The classroom vanished, replaced by cold water and underwater ruins. My air tank was almost empty. I'd been down there for over an hour, but it had felt like minutes. I ascended carefully, doing a safety stop to avoid the bends. When I broke the surface, I gasped, the shock of reality hitting me like a physical blow. The sun was setting. Hours had passed. My truck was where I'd left it. but I felt like I'd been gone for days. I stripped off the dive gear and sat on the shore, shaking from cold and emotion. I'd seen it. Been there. Dana was real. Not a reflection, not a hallucination. An actual pocket of reality where the town still existed, and I could live there if I chose, could walk away from Worcester, from park ranger life, from everything I knew, could become the Michael Torres who'd never left the valley. But could I really do that? Could I erase 28 years of memories, relationships, experiences? Could I forget my parents, my friends, my life? Over the next few days, I was useless at work. I went through the motions, but my mind was in Dana, playing out scenarios. What would it be like to live there? To wake up every morning in that perfect small town? To never worry about bills or traffic or the complications of modern life? But also never experience anything new, never see the world change or grow, trapped in 1938 forever, no matter how pleasant the trap. Rich called me into his office again. "Michael, I'm worried about you. You're not yourself. If you need more time off, take it. If you need to talk to someone, I can recommend a therapist. But you can't keep working like this. You're a liability. I know, I'm sorry. I have a decision to make. About my future." What kind of decision? How could I explain? How could I tell him that I was choosing between existing in the surface world or diving into a drowned town that still lived in a pocket of reality? "Career stuff," I said lamely. "Just figuring out if this is where I want to be." "Well, figure it out soon, because right now, you're not here at all. You're somewhere else entirely." He was right, I was. That night, I drove to Harold Pratt's apartment. I needed to talk to someone who understood. But when I got there, the landlord told me Harold had passed away 3 days earlier. Died peacefully in his sleep, apparently. They'd found him in his bed, a smile on his face, surrounded by photographs of Dana. "Did you know him?" the landlord asked. "A little." He seemed like a good man. He was. Sad, though. Never seemed fully here, you know? Always talking about some town that didn't exist anymore. I think he died still wishing he was back there. But as the landlord walked away, I wondered if Harold had finally made his choice. Wondered if he'd crossed over in his sleep, found his way to Dana at last, reunited with his parents and his lost love Ruth. Wondered if I'd see him there if I went back. I went to Quabbin one last time. Not to dive, just to look, to see the reflection and make my final decision. The water was perfectly calm. Dana spread out before me in all its glory. And there, on Main Street, I could see Harold Pratt, young and healthy, walking with a woman I assumed was Ruth. He was home. Jennifer Marks was there too, laughing with a group of people outside the general store. She looked happier than I'd ever seen her. And the other Michael, my Dana self, was standing at the edge of the reflection, looking up at me, waiting to see what I would choose. Eleanor appeared next to him. She didn't say anything, just waited. This was it, the moment of decision. I could wade into the water, let myself sink, pass through that barrier and become Dana Michael. Live that simple, perfect life in a town that existed outside time. Be complete, be home, be happy. Or I could walk away, accept that I was Worcester Michael, that my life was here in the modern world, split and incomplete but real in its own way. Let the pull fade eventually. Let Dana become just a beautiful dream I once had. Both choices were valid. Both were real. I stood there for a long time, watching the town and the water, feeling the pull one last time. And then I made my choice. I walked to the water's edge, put my hand in, feeling the cold shock of reality. The pull intensified, urging me forward. Come home, it said. Complete yourself. Be whole. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, and I stepped back. I chose the surface, chose Worcester, chose the split, incomplete life I'd been living. Because yes, it was incomplete. Yes, I'd always feel a pull toward something I couldn't quite reach, but it was mine, my memories, my experiences, my choices. Dana Michael could live his perfect life in the frozen town. Wester Michael would live his imperfect life in the moving world. Both were real. Both mattered. But I chose to be the Michael who'd made this choice, not the Michael who'd never had to make it. The reflection wavered, and for a moment I saw sadness in Eleanor's face, but also understanding. She nodded once, then faded. The pull began to weaken. Not disappear entirely, it would always be there. But it became bearable, became part of who I was, rather than something fighting against who I was. I got back in my truck and drove home to Worcester, to my life, to my reality. That was 25 years ago. I stayed on at Quabbin for another 5 years before moving to a different park. I eventually married, had kids, lived the life I chose. I still visit Quabbin sometimes, still look at the water on calm days and see the reflection. Dana is there, eternal and unchanging. The people I knew are there, living their perfect lives in their perfect town. Sometimes I wonder if I made the right choice. Wonder what my life would have been like if I'd stepped forward instead of back. But then I look at my children, products of this reality, this timeline, this choice. And I know that right or wrong doesn't matter. I chose, and that choice created this life. The split never fully healed. Part of me will always be in Dana, watching from the reflection. But part of Dana is also here, with me, in every memory of that impossible town. Some rangers who work at Quabbin still report seeing strange things in the water. Reflections that don't match reality. Lights under the surface at night. The sound of church bells on Sunday mornings when there are no churches nearby. And every few years, someone disappears. A visitor, a fisherman, a ranger. They're listed as drownings, accidents, unsolved mysteries. But I know the truth. They made a different choice than I did. They stepped forward instead of back. They chose Dana instead of the surface. And somewhere in the eternal town beneath the water, they're home. Finally, completely, irreversibly home. As for me, I live with the question. Not regret, just the eternal question of what if. What if I'd chosen differently? What if I'd let the water take me? What if I'm still standing at that water's edge, frozen in the moment of decision, existing in both choices simultaneously? The reflection offers no answers. It just shows me what could have been, eternal and unchanging, and I show it what is, temporary and imperfect. Both realities, forever parallel, both true, both real, surface and depth. Worcester and Dana, the life I lived and the life I didn't. I chose the surface, but the depth chose me too. And somewhere in the water, I'll always be both.